The alpha of the Black Moon Pack had never looked at me before tonight, but when his golden eyes finally met mine across the clearing, it wasn't my mind that recognized him. It was the frantic, ancient howl of my own blood. And I knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, I had just been claimed by the one man I was sworn to avoid. Chapter 1. The Cold Before Dawn. The air in the forest tasted of frost and secrets. It was a sharp, clean taste that Kaia breathed in deep, letting it burn her lungs. Each pull of breath was a punishment, each stretch of her aching muscles, a penance. The cold ground seeped through her worn leggings, a familiar chill that did little to numb the deeper ache inside her, the hollow space where her wolf was supposed to be. She moved through the pre-dawn gloom, a shadow among shadows, her feet finding purchase on moss-slick stones and damp earth with a silence born from years of practice. She was a ghost in her own pack's territory. For this reason, she always came here before anyone else. The pack treated weakness like a disease, something to be cut out or cast aside, and her body's refusal to shift was the most shameful sickness of all. From a ridge overlooking the clearing, she watched them gather. The Black Moon Pack. Not a group of people, but a force of nature. A rolling tide of muscle, laughter, and casual power. She saw Liam, his shoulders broad as an oak tree, playfully shove Sarah, who spun away with a grin that flashed white in the dim light. Their joy was a language she'd forgotten how to speak. It felt like watching a world through thick, soundproof glass. They were warmth and life. She was the silence that ringed their fire. Consequently, she learned to find strength in other ways. Her body, though stubbornly human, was hard as river stone. She could run for miles without tiring, climb trees that would make a squirrel nervous, and track a deer with senses honed by sheer, desperate will. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. The true pack run, the one that would begin any minute now, wasn't about endurance. It was about the thunder of paws shaking the ground, the wild symphony of howls rising to the moon, the pure freedom of bone and sinew breaking and reshaping into something glorious. Something she would never know. A strange, cold numbness tingled in her palms, a familiar sensation when the bitterness threatened to swallow her whole. For a split second, a fallen leaf trembling on a branch beside her went utterly still, as if frozen in time. She blinked, and the spell was broken. Just a trick of the light, she told herself, because the alternative was too strange to consider. The wind shifted, carrying their voices up to her perch. Bet she shows up again. Liam's voice, a low rumble. Sarah laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. The little human? It's kind of pathetic, isn't it? Like a pup chasing its own tail. Does she really think she can keep up? Maybe she thinks Alpha Eric's will take pity on her. Pity? Sarah snorted. He's the new Alpha, not a charity worker. This is his first official run since taking over from Marcus. He needs to show strength, not coddle the pack's broken toy. Broken toy. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. They weren't meant for her ears, but they found her all the same. They always did. She clenched her numb hands into fists, her fingernails digging into her skin. They saw her as a pathetic child, a thing of pity. Not a warrior who trained until her muscles screamed. Not a survivor who refused to break. Just a flaw. An embarrassment. Fine. Let them think it. She would be there tonight, not because she wanted their acceptance. She told herself that was a lie. But because her presence was a quiet act of defiance. It was a way of screaming that she was still here, even if they all wished she would just disappear. The thing is, their mockery fueled a different kind of fire within her. It was a cold, hard flame that didn't warm, but it burned bright. She would run on her two human legs, and she would push herself until her lungs felt like they were full of glass. They would see her fall, and they would see her get back up. Again and again. She wouldn't just endure their laughter. She would swallow it and turn it into fuel. For tonight was not just another run. It was a declaration, a promise she made to the silent, sleeping thing inside her. The announcement of the new Alpha's presence changed everything, setting a new, dangerous stage for her solitary war. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Silence. That single callous phrase, broken toy, did more than just sting. It ripped open a memory she kept locked away in the deepest part of her mind. Suddenly, the damp forest floor faded away, replaced by the hard-packed earth of the ceremonial circle. The air was thick not with pine, but with the scent of sacred herbs and the electric anticipation of the pack. She was 10 years old again, small and trembling, standing under the full silver gaze of a moon that was meant to be her deliverance. It was the night of her first shift, the most important night in any werewolf's life. It was a time of celebration, a welcoming into the true heart of the pack. For the others, it had been beautiful. She'd watched her friends writhe and gasp, their small forms twisting as the magic took them. Bones cracked and reformed with sounds that should have been horrifying, but were instead holy. Awe, not fear, had filled the clearing as their sleek, juvenile wolf forms rose, shaky, but whole. Then, it was her turn. She had stood in the center, her arms outstretched, her face tilted to the sky, and waited, and waited. The silence that fell was heavier than any mountain. It wasn't a respectful quiet. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of confusion, then pity, and finally, shame. Her shame. Her failure. The magic had passed over her, leaving her small, shivering, and irrevocably human. Her mother's voice cut through the memory, a desperate, pleading whisper to the Alpha at the time. "Marcus. Please, Alpha. She's just a late bloomer. Her wolf is there. I know it is." Alpha Marcus, a formidable wolf with a grizzled snout and eyes like chips of flint, had looked down at her not with anger, but with something far worse, disappointment. "The moon has made its choice, Alara. The girl is incomplete." Incomplete. That word had sealed her fate. From that moment on, she was different. The other kids, who were once her friends, now looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and scorn. Their games became rougher, their taunts sharper. She became the outcast, the cautionary tale whispered to pups who were slow to learn. It was in that crushing silence that she made a vow. She would never rely on anyone's mercy again. Not her mother's hope, not an Alpha's pity. Love and pack bonds were fragile things, easily broken by a moment of weakness. Strength, true, undeniable strength, was the only thing they would ever respect. That is precisely why she pushed her body to its limits, because if her wolf wouldn't give her power, her human will would have to suffice. A sharp howl from the clearing below pulled her violently back to the present. The memory dissolved, leaving its bitter taste on her tongue. Her heart was pounding, a frantic drum against her ribs. The pack was getting ready. An Omega with a voice that carried like a bell called out, "Harden your hearts and ready your spirit. Alpha Erix leads the run tonight. It is his first since the marking of his leadership. Show him the strength of Black Moon." Alpha Eric. The name itself felt heavy, dangerous. He was new, having taken the mantle only a few months ago after Alpha Marcus's unfortunate hunting accident. No one spoke much about it, but a nervous energy had clung to the pack ever since. Erix was younger, stronger, and said to have a ferocity that bordered on terrifying. He was an unknown quantity, and his presence tonight turned her personal act of defiance into a public, high-stakes gamble. This new leader, who was trying to solidify his rule, would not tolerate a broken toy in his first official display of power. She should turn back. She should hide in the shadows where she belonged. Instead, a reckless, stubborn resolve hardened in her gut. No, she would not hide. She had sworn to force them to notice her. And what better way than to face the new Alpha's judgment head-on? She didn't want his pity, and she sure as hell didn't fear his anger. The humiliation of the past was a powerful motivator, a ghost that pushed her forward when every instinct screamed to retreat. She would run tonight, not just as an outcast, but as a challenge. a question mark in the perfect predatory world of her pack. The decision settled not with peace, but with the grim acceptance of a warrior stepping onto a battlefield she knew she was likely to lose. Yet the possibility of a different outcome was a spark she couldn't extinguish. Chapter 3. The Alpha's Pace. She moved from the tree line like a wraith, her soft-soled boots making no sound as she took her place at the very edge of the assembled pack. Heads turned. A few snickers rippled through the air, sharp as cracking whips. She ignored them, lifting her chin and fixing her gaze on the path ahead, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The air was electric, thick with the smell of musk, pine, and raw power. This close, the energy of the pack was a physical force, a humming vibration that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. They were all watching her, waiting for her to fail, and for a wild, terrifying moment, she wanted to prove them right, to turn and flee back into the safety of the shadows. But then Eric's appeared. He didn't walk into the clearing. He commanded it. The low chatter died instantly. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of his dark shirt and a presence that sucked all the air from the space around him. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his face was all hard angles and shadows, but it was his eyes that held everyone captive. They weren't just gold. They were molten, ancient, and filled with the weight of his new authority. He scanned the pack, his gaze sweeping over each member, a silent assessment that missed nothing. And then, his eyes landed on her. It wasn't a glance. It was a collision. For a single, breath-stealing second, the world fell away. The cold, the jeers, the ache in her bones, all of it vanished, replaced by a searing, white-hot shock that jolted through her from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. It felt like lightning striking a dead tree, a violent, impossible awakening. Her sleeping inner wolf, the creature she had long given up on, threw itself against the cage of her ribs with a desperate, silent scream. What was this terrifying magnetic pull towards a man she didn't even know? He broke contact first, his expression unreadable as he turned to face the path. "Run!" His voice was a low, guttural command that bypassed the ears and hit straight in the gut. And they were off. It was chaos. A thunder of paws and bodies surging forward. The ground trembled. The wolves who had already shifted were a blur of fur and speed, their powerful forms devouring the distance. Kaia ran on her two legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pushed herself, her legs pumping, her lungs burning, focusing on the sheer physical agony to block out the humiliation and that terrifying jolt of connection. She was surprisingly fast, keeping pace with some of the slower, younger members, but it was a losing battle. A twisted root, hidden in the shadows, snaked out and caught her ankle. She went down, hard. A cry of pain and frustration was ripped from her throat as she landed in the slick, cold mud. Laughter erupted behind her, loud, unrestrained, triumphant. Tears of pure rage pricked her eyes. She slammed a muddy fist against the ground, utterly defeated. And then, silence. The pounding of paws behind her ceased. The cruel laughter died. A shadow fell over her. Trembling, she pushed herself up on her elbows and looked back. He stood over her. Eric's. He hadn't even broken a sweat. But he had stopped. The Alpha had stopped. For her. His golden eyes bored into her, and in their depths, she saw something other than pity or disgust. It was a raw, predatory intensity. A hungry focus that made her skin prickle with a fear that tasted nothing like her usual shame. Without a word, he slowed his pace to a human jog, his long legs easily matching her position on the ground. For a moment he ran beside her, the Alpha, running at a human's pace. And then, beside him, the air shimmered. His wolf materialized from the shadows, a monstrous beast of black fur and moonlight, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen. It fixed its blazing golden eyes on her, and from its massive chest came a sound that was not for the pack. A low, rumbling growl. It wasn't a threat. It was something deeper, darker, a sound of possession, claiming. Her mind went blank. Every instinct, every cell in her body screamed one word: run. Not from him, from the terrifying truth in that sound. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and bolted. She didn't follow the path. She plunged sideways into the dark, tangled heart of the forest, fleeing the alpha who had just marked her as his. Chapter 4. The Scent of the Storm. The forest was supposed to be her sanctuary, but now it felt like a cage of whispering leaves and pointing branches. Kaia ran until her lungs were fire and her legs were lead, propelled by a terror she couldn't name. That growl. It hadn't been a sound. It was a brand, a searing mark of possession that had nothing to do with pack law and everything to do with some ancient, primal truth her body understood even if her mind refused to. She finally collapsed at the base of an ancient oak, its gnarled roots a comforting tangle against her trembling back. Her breath came in ragged, painful sobs. What had happened? The alpha's eyes, the impossible jolt of energy, his wolf's possessive rumble, it all spun in her head, a chaotic storm of confusion and fear. She pressed her cold palms against the rough bark, trying to ground herself, to force the frantic pounding of her heart to slow. Despite her attempt to find solitude, she knew it was a futile effort. She smelled him long before she heard him. The scent of pine and smoke was stronger now, laced with something else. The clean, sharp smell of an approaching thunderstorm. It was him, Alpha Eric's. When he stepped through the curtain of ferns, he moved with an unnatural silence for a man his size, his presence a heavy weight that settled over the small clearing. He didn't look angry. He looked inevitable. His golden eyes found her in the gloom, and the world seemed to shrink until only the two of them existed within it. "You run fast," he said, his voice a low timbre that vibrated through the air. "For a human." Kaia scrambled to her feet, instinctively putting the tree between them. "I was just finishing my run, Alpha." The title felt like ash in her mouth. "No, you were not," he stated, not unkindly, but with a finality that allowed for no argument. He took a slow step closer, and her entire body tensed. "You were fleeing. From me." He paused, his gaze intense, searching. "My wolf knows you. It has known you since the moment I first saw you. It screams a word inside my head every time I look at you. Do you know what that word is?" She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. She didn't want to know. Acknowledging it would make it real. "Mate," he said, and the single word hung in the air, heavy and unbreakable. "Why do you run from it?" "You're wrong," she whispered, the denial tasting like a lie even to her own ears. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by sheer, desperate terror. "You're the new Alpha. Maybe your senses are confused. I am not your mate. I can't be." How could she be? The moon itself had rejected her. She was the pack's cautionary tale, the incomplete wolf. A fated bond with the Alpha wasn't a blessing. It was a curse that would destroy them both. She had to deny it because accepting it meant inviting a level of scorn and hatred she would never survive. The pack would see her as a stain on his authority, a shameful secret he was forced to bear. Eric's watched her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, simply observing her with that unnerving stillness. "My wolf is never confused about such things," he finally replied, his voice soft but laced with steel. "And neither am I. I felt it. And so did you." He took another step, closing the distance until only a few feet separated them. She could feel the heat rolling off his body, see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "I do not know why the moon has hidden your wolf, but it is there. I can feel it. It calls to mine." "There's nothing to call," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I'm broken." "You are not broken," he growled, the sound a low vibration in his chest. "You are hiding." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing her arm. A jolt, hot and fierce, shot through her, and she flinched back as if burned. His eyes darkened with a flash of something possessive and wild. "You can lie to yourself, little wolf. You can even try to lie to me, but you cannot run from your own fate." He held her gaze for one more heartbeat before turning and melting back into the shadows as silently as he had appeared, leaving her alone with the echo of his words. The scent of his storm lingered long after he was gone, a promise of the chaos to come. Chapter 5. A Glimmer in the Gloom. In the 2 days that followed the confrontation in the woods, Kaia existed in a state of heightened alert. She moved along the fringes of the pack, a ghost haunted by the memory of golden eyes and a possessive growl. She took on the most undesirable tasks, mending nets, tending the smokers, and patrolling the farthest, coldest reaches of their territory, anything to avoid crossing paths with Eric's. She needed to be invisible, because the alternative was a truth she wasn't ready to face. The rumors had already begun. Whispers followed her like smoke. Questions about why the Alpha had stopped the run, what he had said to her in the forest. Her outcast status had shifted from something pathetic to something dangerously intriguing, and she hated every second of it. Her current assignment was patrolling the northern ridge, a desolate stretch of rock and scraggly pine where the wind bit with teeth of ice. It was a lonely task, which was exactly why she'd volunteered. Up here there was only the wind and the snow-dusted peaks. No whispers, no golden eyes. The quiet was a relief, but it also left too much room for her thoughts to wander. What had he meant? Hiding. Her wolf wasn't hiding. It was absent, a void, a failure. She clutched the rough leather of her tunic, the physical sensation a small anchor in a sea of confusion. The truth was, she was terrified. The pull she felt toward him was undeniable, a treacherous current threatening to drag her under, and she fought it with every fiber of her being. That is when the familiar scent of the forest was tainted by something else. The odor was foul, a mix of wet fur, decay, and a desperate, hungry malice. Rogues. Before she could even draw her hunting knife, they were on her. 2 of them, their forms gaunt and mangy, their eyes burning with a feral madness. They were trespassing, driven by starvation to challenge Black Moon territory. She reacted on pure instinct, years of solitary training taking over. She dodged the first one's lunge, her boot connecting with its ribs with a satisfying thud. The second one was smarter, circling around to flank her. She was a good fighter, quick and agile, but she was human. They were shifters. They were faster, stronger, and driven by a hunger that made them reckless. The first rogue lunged again, its jaws snapping inches from her throat. She stumbled back, tripping over an exposed root, the second time in 3 days, and hit the ground hard. Pain shot up her arm. The rogue loomed over her, saliva dripping from its yellowed fangs, its weight pinning her down. This is it, she thought, a strange sense of calm washing over her. This is how it ends. But just as its jaws opened for the final killing bite, a black hurricane of fur and fury erupted from the trees. Eric's. He hit the rogue like a battering ram, a blur of motion and a symphony of savage snarls. The fight was brutal, primal, and mercifully short. He was the Alpha, and these were starved, weakened outcasts. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. While he was occupied, the second rogue saw its chance. It abandoned its dead companion and launched itself at her. Time seemed to slow down. There was no time to think, only to react. She threw up her hands, a desperate, useless gesture. A scream built in her throat. But instead of a scream, something else emerged. A wave of tangible cold, a pulse of pure shadow, erupted from her palms. The air grew heavy, silent. The rogue, mid-air, seemed to falter, its eyes widening in confusion as the unnatural energy washed over it. That single moment of hesitation was all Eric's needed. He was there, his claws sinking into the rogue's neck, ending its life with a final brutal snap. Silence descended upon the ridge, broken only by the sound of their ragged breaths and the drip of blood onto the forest floor. Eric's stood over the dead wolf, his massive form still radiating lethal energy. He slowly turned his head, his golden eyes finding hers. There was no triumph in his gaze, only shock, and a deep, unsettling curiosity. He had seen it. He had seen the flicker of strange, dark power that had come from her. The space between them crackled with unspoken questions, the scent of blood and the undeniable heat of their bond creating a dangerous, intoxicating cocktail. She had tried so desperately to remain unseen, but now he had witnessed something no one, not even she, could explain, forever changing the nature of his focus on her. Chapter 6. The Alpha's Decree. Returning to the village felt like walking into her own trial. The sight of Alpha Eric's, grim and silent, carrying the body of a dead rogue with Kaia trailing behind him, sent a shockwave through the pack. The news of the breach spread like wildfire, and with it, a new, more dangerous narrative began to form around her. It was one thing to be the pack's broken toy. It was another thing entirely to be an omen. The elders convened an emergency gathering in the Great Hall, the heart of their community, a place where laws were made and judgments were passed. The room was packed, the air thick with fear and suspicion. Kaia stood near the back, wanting to be swallowed by the shadows, but she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The discussion was heated. The rogues were a sign of weakness, a challenge to their dominance. But the conversation quickly turned, guided by the venomous words of an old withered elder named Kaelin, whose eyes had been fixed on her since she'd returned. "The rogues are a symptom, not the disease," he rasped, his voice thin and dry as autumn leaves. He pointed a trembling, gnarled finger directly at Kaia. "This girl, she is the source of this discord. Her weakness invites challenge. I was on the ridge after the Alpha brought her back. There was a taint in the air around her, a dark energy. She is not just unshifted, she is a curse upon this pack." A murmur of agreement swept through the hall. It was so easy for them to believe. She was the flaw in their perfect design, the convenient scapegoat for all their fears. Her stomach twisted into a knot of helpless rage. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of their judgment, but this was different. This was an accusation that could get her exiled or killed. Just as the tide of condemnation was about to crest, Eric's moved. He stepped into the center of the hall, his presence instantly silencing the crowd. He dropped the rogue's body to the floor with a heavy, final thud. "Enough," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute obedience. He swept his gaze over the elders, then the rest of the pack, his golden eyes blazing with an authority no one dared to challenge. "She is not a curse," he declared, his voice ringing with power. "She is not a weakness," he continued, taking a step toward Kaia, his eyes locking with hers. "She is my mate." The collective gasp was like the sucking of all air from the room. Shock, disbelief, outrage. The declaration was a bomb dropped into the heart of their society. Kaia felt the blood drain from her face, her body swaying as if struck. It was happening, her worst nightmare. He was chaining her to him in front of everyone, making her a target for their hatred. Ignoring the uproar, Eric's walked right up to her, stopping so close she could feel the warmth of his body. He stood between her and the pack, a living shield. He lowered his voice, but it carried in the stunned silence. "She runs beside me," he stated, his gaze unwavering. He then looked back at the stunned pack, his voice rising to an undeniable roar. "She is mine." The finality of his words hung in the air, a decree that could not be challenged. Kaia felt trapped in a hurricane, her emotions a chaotic swirl of humiliation, terror, and a tiny, treacherous flicker of something that felt like safety. She had been claimed. Publicly. Irrevocably. But before the pack could fully process this world-altering revelation, the heavy doors of the Great Hall burst open. A frantic sentry, breathless and wide-eyed, stumbled into the room. Alpha! He gasped, pointing toward the entrance of the village. An alpha has crossed our border! It's Alpha Damien of the Shadow Crest Pack! Eric stiffened, his protective stance over Kaia unwavering. What does he want? The sentry swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward Kaia. He comes with a message, Alpha, the wolf stammered. He demands we hand over the unshifted girl. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Cage. The great hall erupted into a cauldron of chaos. The sentry's words ignited a firestorm of fear and outrage, the pack's shock over Eric's claim instantly eclipsed by the threat of a rival alpha at their gates. Voices rose in a cacophony of questions and curses. Through it all, Eric's remained a pillar of stillness, his body a living shield in front of Kaia. He raised a hand, and the uproar died to a tense, simmering silence. His command was absolute. Secure the borders, double the patrols, he ordered his beta, his voice dangerously calm. No one gets in or out without my word. Get the elders to my study, now. He then turned, and his golden eyes, hard as ancient amber, found Kaia. You, with me. It was not a request. He didn't grab her or force her, yet his authority pulled her along in his wake as surely as if he had thrown a chain around her neck. The walk from the great hall to the Alpha's lodge was a gauntlet of pure hatred. Eyes followed her every step, accusing, resentful, furious. She was the cause of this, the weak link, the unshifted girl who had somehow bewitched their new Alpha and brought an enemy to their doorstep. She lifted her chin, her face a mask of indifference she was far from feeling, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her fear. This was her new reality, a walking target in a home that had never truly been hers. The Alpha's lodge was built from the heartwood of ancient oaks, a fortress of timber and stone. Inside, it was sparse, functional, and overwhelmingly masculine. Furs were thrown over heavy wooden furniture, and the air smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and him. It was a cage, she realized, a comfortable, well-appointed cage. He led her to a room off the main living space and gestured for her to enter. You will stay here. Guards will be posted outside. The door clicked shut behind her, and the sound of a bolt sliding home echoed the slamming of a door in her soul. She spun around, pure fury finally breaking through her shock. You can't do this, she seethed, her voice a raw whisper. You can't just lock me up. He turned from the door, his face an unreadable mask of shadows. I can, and I will. Alpha Damien does not make idle threats. His demand for you has turned you from an outcast into a strategic asset. Out there, he gestured vaguely toward the village. You are a target. In here, you are safe. I don't want your safety, she shot back, stalking toward him. I don't want any of this. You had no right to stand up in front of the whole pack and claim me like I'm some prize to be won. You didn't even ask me? For the first time, a flicker of something raw and unguarded crossed his face. Ask you? He scoffed, his voice dropping to a low growl. While an enemy alpha is at our border demanding I hand you over, there was no time for a discussion. I made the choice an alpha must make. I protected what is mine. I am not yours, she yelled, jabbing a finger at his chest. I belong to myself. Do you? He challenged, his proximity overwhelming her senses, the heat from his body a palpable force. Or do you belong to the rival who wants to drag you away for reasons we do not yet understand? I chose the option that keeps you breathing. His logic was infuriating because it was sound. He had acted as a leader, a protector. But it was the cold pragmatism of it that chilled her. He was protecting an asset, a fated bond he was owed, not her. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Defeated, she sank onto the edge of the bed, the fight draining out of her. Later that night, long after the lodge had fallen silent, a floorboard creaked. Kaia opened her eyes to see his silhouette framed against the large window in the main room, bathed in the pale light of the moon. He wasn't standing like an alpha. He was hunched slightly, his head bowed, radiating a profound loneliness that struck a chord deep inside her. For the first time, She saw not the arrogant leader who had imprisoned her, but a man haunted by burdens she couldn't possibly imagine, revealing a crack in his formidable armor. Chapter 8. Whispers of a Brother. The days that followed bled into one another, each one a copy of the last. Kaia was a prisoner in the heart of the pack, confined to Eric's lodge while the tension outside mounted. She could hear the agitated howls at night, sense the restless fear that had gripped the village. Alpha Damien had not attacked, but his presence lingered at their border like a patient predator, a silent siege that frayed everyone's nerves. Eric's was gone for long stretches, consumed by meetings with elders and organizing patrols. But he always brought her meals himself. Their interactions were clipped, tense exchanges over trays of food, yet the air between them was thick with unspoken things. A dangerous awareness simmered just beneath the surface, a low hum of energy that grew louder with each passing day. To combat the suffocating boredom, Kaia began to explore her prison. She ran her fingers over the collection of strange rocks on the mantelpiece, traced the faded maps of their territory pinned to the wall, and breathed in the scent of him that clung to everything. On a low shelf, tucked away behind a stack of old journals, she found it. A small, crudely carved wooden wolf. It was whittled from pale birchwood, its surface worn smooth from years of being held. There was an innocence to it, a charming imperfection that stood in stark contrast to the lethal efficiency of everything else in the lodge. She picked it up, the wood cool and light in her palm, a strange sense of sorrow emanating from the object. "Put that down." His voice, sharp and laced with a pain that startled her, came from the doorway. Eric stood there, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the small carving in her hand. She had never heard him use that tone before. I'm sorry," she stammered, quickly placing the wolf back on the shelf. "I didn't mean to." He strode into the room, his usual controlled grace gone, replaced by a raw, wounded energy. He gently picked up the wooden wolf, his large fingers dwarfing it. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice softer now but thick with emotion. "Behind the journals," she whispered. "I was just looking." He stared at the carving, his thumb stroking its worn surface. "My brother made this," he said, the words heavy. "Leo. He carved it the winter before." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Kaia's resentment toward him seemed to evaporate, replaced by a wave of empathy so strong it made her ache. "Before what?" she asked gently. Eric's wouldn't meet her eyes. He continued to stare at the small wolf as if it held the entire world. "Before a patrol went wrong. He was younger than me, faster, but I was the one who was supposed to be in charge. I made a bad call." He finally looked at her, and the guilt in his eyes was a raw, open wound. "He died protecting me from my own mistake, Kaia. He took a blade meant for me." The confession hung between them, shattering the image of the infallible Alpha and revealing the broken man beneath. It explained everything: his suffocating need for control, his fierce, almost desperate protectiveness. He wasn't just guarding his fated mate. He was trying to prevent history from repeating itself. In that moment, a profound shift occurred between them. As her heart went out to him, a strange thing happened. The dancing flame in the nearby oil lamp seemed to stretch, the shadow it cast on the wall deepening and flowing like black water for a split second, reaching toward her. She blinked, her breath catching, but when she looked again, it was just a normal shadow, a trick of the eye. Yet the brief, unnatural flicker left a cold trace in the air, a whisper of the strange power she still refused to understand, now stirring in the presence of his raw, unguarded grief. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. The fragile truce born from Eric's confession was more dangerous than their open hostility had been. The anger that had once stood between them was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering tension that coiled in the air of the lodge, growing tighter with every shared meal, every accidental brush of hands. The knowledge of his past pain had changed him in her eyes. She no longer saw just the arrogant Alpha who had trapped her. She saw the grieving brother who was terrified of losing someone else. This new understanding made the confinement, the sheer, undeniable proximity of him, an exquisite form of torture. His scent was a constant presence, his nearness a low hum against her skin that she could not ignore. The breaking point came on the 5th night of her imprisonment. A storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in her soul. She was pacing the main room like a caged animal, the 4 walls closing in on her. She couldn't take it anymore. When Eric's entered from his study, looking weary and burdened, she rounded on him. "You have to let me out of here," she said, her voice low and trembling with pent-up energy. "Damien is still out there, Kaia. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," she retorted, her voice rising. "I am not some fragile doll you can hide away in a box. I am a warrior. I've been training my whole life. I can help. Let me fight." "No!" he roared, the sound shaking the very timbers of the lodge. He slammed his hand against the wall beside her head, caging her in, his face inches from hers. His golden eyes were a blazing inferno of fury and fear. "The answer is no! You are my mate, and I will not lose you like I lost him." The mention of Leo shattered the last of their restraint. His pain, her frustration, and the electric current that always flowed between them ignited in the space of a single ragged breath. All the unspoken desire, all the primal pull of their bond, erupted to the surface. "You think this is protecting me?" she challenged, her voice dropping to a husky whisper, her hands coming up to press against his chest. "This is killing me, Eric's." His name on her lips was like a spark to dry tinder. A low growl ripped from his chest, a sound of pure, unrestrained need. His eyes darkened, the gold consumed by the black of his pupils. "You have no idea what you do to me," he rasped. And then his mouth was on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. A desperate, hungry claiming that was as much a battle as it was a surrender. It was the taste of the storm outside, of pine and smoke, of rage and a desperate, aching loneliness. She met his ferocity with her own, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. This was madness, a betrayal of every vow she'd made to herself to never be weak, to never rely on anyone. Yet, she couldn't stop. It was too late. He was the lightning, and she was the dead tree. And this was the inevitable fire. His hands slid from the wall to her waist, pulling her flush against the hard lines of his body. Bang! 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 A frantic, deafening pounding on the main door shattered the moment. They sprang apart, their chests heaving, their eyes wide with shock and flushed with desire. The spell was broken, the raw magic of the moment dissolving into the cold, harsh reality of the world outside. "Alpha!" A panicked voice yelled from the other side of the door. It was his beta. "You must come at once." Eric's, his face a thunderous mask, stalked to the door and threw the bolt. "What is it?" he snarled. The beta stood there, soaked from the rain, his expression grim. "A message from the Shadow Crest Pack, Alpha." He held up a blood-stained arrow. "They have 2 of our border patrols." Chapter 10. The Blood-Stained Arrow. The heat of their interrupted moment was instantly extinguished by the icy reality of the beta's words. The world, which had narrowed to the space of a single desperate kiss, rushed back in with the force of a tidal wave. Eric's was no longer the man whose touch had set her on fire. He was the Alpha, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury, his body radiating a lethal authority. The crisis had arrived, and there was no room for the fragile, unnamed thing that had just sparked between them. He issued a series of sharp commands, his voice a weapon cutting through the chaos. He would meet Damien. Not on their rivals' terms, but at the ancient standing stones that marked the neutral midpoint of their shared border. As he turned to leave, strapping a heavy silver knife to his thigh, Kaia stepped in front of him. "I'm coming with you." His eyes, once again the molten gold of a predator, narrowed. "You will not. You will stay here, where it is safe." "Your safety is a cage, and I am done with it," she countered, her voice low but unyielding. The last vestiges of the timid, broken girl were burning away, replaced by a hard, defiant resolve. This is happening because of me. I will not hide in your lodge and wait for others to bleed for me. Your pack already hates me for being a burden. I will not prove them right by being a coward. This was a new and terrifying feeling, a sense of responsibility not just for herself, but for the wolves whose lives were now on the line. She had to go, because staying hidden felt like a betrayal of the warrior she had tried so hard to become. Eric stared at her, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He saw the shift in her, the iron in her spine that hadn't been there before. Perhaps he was still reeling from their kiss, or perhaps he understood that locking her away now would only break her spirit. With a low, frustrated growl, he gave a curt nod. "Stay beside me. Do not speak unless I tell you to. Understood?" The meeting at the Standing Stones was thick with tension. The ancient monoliths rose from the ground like the petrified bones of old gods, silent witnesses to a century of pack disputes. Alpha Damien was already there, flanked by two of his largest warriors. He was nothing like she'd expected. He wasn't a brute like the rogues. He was lean and elegant, with hair the color of bleached bone and unsettling pale silver eyes that seemed to see right through you. A cruel, knowing smirk played on his lips as his gaze fell upon her. "Alpha Eric's," Damien purred, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I see you brought the item in question. This will make the transaction much simpler." Eric stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "There will be no transaction. Release my patrols." "They are not prisoners, merely collateral," Damien said with a dismissive wave. "And they will be returned, unharmed, as soon as the girl comes with me." "That will never happen," Eric snarled. Damien's smirk widened. He took a bloody arrow from one of his guards, the message from her patrols. He ran a finger along its stained tip. "Oh, I think it will. You see, this is not a negotiation, Eric's. It is the claiming of a debt." His silver eyes flickered to Kaia, a strange, hungry light in their depths. "The girl carries the blood of the Umbra. Her line owes mine a life, and I have come to collect." The word, Umbra, meant nothing to her. But beside Eric's, Kaelin, the old, suspicious elder, let out a choked gasp, his face paling to the color of ash. A visible tremor ran through the old wolf. Damien's smirk became a triumphant grin. He had struck a nerve, revealed a secret he knew they had forgotten, a piece of a puzzle that changed the entire game and left Kaia standing at its terrifying center. Chapter 11. The Elder's Secret. They returned to the village under a heavy blanket of silence, the word Umbra hanging between them like a ghost. The tense standoff at the border had solved nothing. Their patrols were still captive, and Damien's cryptic demand had planted a seed of deep unease within the pack. Eric's authority had held them in check, but Kaia could feel the shift. The pack's fear was beginning to curdle into resentment aimed squarely at her. She wasn't just a burden anymore. She was a mystery, a catalyst for a war they did not understand. As soon as they entered the Great Hall, Kaelin, the elder who had been so terrified at the border, approached them, his movements stiff and urgent. "Alpha, we must speak, in private." His gaze flickered to Kaia. She must be there. In the heavy silence of the Alpha's study, with the door bolted and the fire casting long dancing shadows on the walls, Kaelin finally broke. His arrogance and accusation were gone, replaced by the weary weight of a secret kept for too long. "I was wrong," he began, his voice a dry rasp. He looked at Kaia, his old eyes filled with a mixture of fear and awe. I believed the line was dead, that the moon had chosen to let it fade into nothing. I kept this secret to protect the pack from old tales, and to protect you from a fate I thought you had escaped." Eric stood beside the hearth, his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. "Protect her from what, Kaelin? What is Umbra?" The elder took a deep, shuddering breath. "It is not a what. It is a who. A bloodline, ancient and powerful, that was thought to be extinct. A line of wolves who did not just run under the moon. They could command its shadows. He turned his full attention to Kaia, who stood frozen, her heart pounding a deafening rhythm against her ribs. Your mother was not from our pack, Kaia. She came to us as a refugee, her own pack destroyed. What she never told anyone, what I only knew because I saw the mark on her wrist before she died, was that she was the last of the Umbra. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Her mother? The quiet, sad woman who had pleaded for her incomplete daughter? A commander of shadows? It made no sense. If she had this power, Kaia whispered, her voice hoarse, why didn't she? Because she feared it, Kaelin interrupted. Just as our ancestors did, the power is tied to a prophecy. He began to speak, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of ancient lore. When the last daughter of the Umbra is born without a wolf, the line seems broken, but should her fated alpha find her, their joining will not be just of mates, but of magic. His power will be the key that unlocks her blood. Together they will either birth an age of peace or unleash a shadow that will devour the moon itself. The prophecy landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Kaia stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. All this time, the silence where her wolf should have been was not an absence, but a lock, a waiting. The revelation crashed over her, a dizzying, terrifying wave that reshaped her entire existence. She was not a failure, she was a weapon, a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. Her gaze shot to Eric's, a new, terrible suspicion dawning in her mind. His claim, his possessiveness, his insistence on the mate bond. Was it all just to fulfill this prophecy? To gain this power for himself? The question that had haunted her, will I ever be worthy, was suddenly replaced by a far more terrifying one. Looking at the powerful alpha, whose fate was now inextricably tangled with her own, she had to ask, "Did you know?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her sudden, devastating doubt. "Is this why you claimed me?" Chapter 12. A different kind of hunger. Eric's denial was immediate and fierce. "No," he growled, his golden eyes flashing with a hurt that looked so genuine it almost convinced her. "I knew nothing of this. I claimed you because my wolf recognized you. Because every instinct I possess screams that you are mine. The prophecy changes nothing." But it changed everything. How could it not? She was no longer just Kaia, the outcast. She was now Kaia, the living prophecy, the key to some ancient, world-altering power. The quiet lodge, which had started to feel less like a prison and more like a complicated sanctuary, now felt charged with the suffocating weight of destiny. The very air between them was different, laced with suspicion and the terrifying potential of the prophecy. Was this undeniable pull she felt toward him real? Or was it just fate's cruel trick, a biological imperative to push two pieces of a prophecy together? He must have seen the war in her eyes because he softened his stance, the alpha's authority melting away to reveal the worried man beneath. "Kaia," he said, his voice low and earnest, "look at me. I don't care about some dusty old legend. I care about getting my patrols back. I care about protecting this pack from Damien, and I care about protecting you." He took a hesitant step closer. "The prophecy doesn't scare me. Losing you to him, that scares me." His vulnerability was a potent weapon, disarming her more effectively than any command. To hear this powerful, formidable leader admit to fear, for her, chipped away at the wall of doubt she was desperately trying to build. But it was still there, a sliver of ice in her heart. He was a leader, and leaders needed power. And she, apparently, was the ultimate source of it. How could he not be tempted by that? The hunger for power, she knew, was a different kind of hunger, but just as primal as any other. "How can you say it changes nothing?" she countered, her voice shaking. "I'm not a person anymore. I'm a means to an end. An age of peace or a world-devouring shadow. There's no room for just me in any of that. She backed away, needing space, needing to think. Maybe this is why I never shifted. Maybe the moon knew I shouldn't be trusted with this, that we shouldn't be. The moon chose you and it chose me, he insisted, his own frustration building. It is our path to walk, whether we like it or not. I will not let you face it alone. You don't get to make that choice for me, she shot back, anger flaring hot and fast. As her rage peaked, she glared at the lone candle burning on the table between them, its small flame a defiant flicker of warmth in the tense room. She focused on it, pouring all her confusion, her fear, and her white-hot fury into that single point of light. She didn't just want it to go out. She wanted to smother it, to crush it. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to obey the silent, venomous command of her will. They stretched, deepened, and flowed like black ink across the floor. In the space of a heartbeat, a single tendril of darkness detached itself and lashed out, snuffing the candle's flame with a faint hiss. The room was plunged into absolute blackness. The sudden, unnatural darkness was a living thing, cold and silent. The only sound was the sharp intake of Eric's breath, followed by the frantic pounding of her own heart. She had done that. Not by accident. Not as a flicker. She had controlled it. She had reached out with her will and commanded the shadows to obey. In the suffocating dark, she felt his presence more keenly than ever. He hadn't moved, but she could feel the shock rolling off him, the dawning realization that the prophecy wasn't just words in a book. It was here. It was real. And it was awake. Chapter 13. A Taste of Shadow and Flame. The darkness Kaia had summoned was a living entity. It was cold, absolute, and it hummed with a silent, terrifying power that echoed the newfound pulse inside her own veins. She stood frozen in the blackness, her heart hammering against her ribs, the scent of snuffed smoke sharp in the air. She had done that. She had bent the shadows to her will. The fear of it was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a tiny, dangerous spark of exhilaration began to glow. For the first time in her life, she was not defined by a lack but by a presence. A formidable, terrifying presence. Eric's was the first to break the charged silence. His voice, when it came, was not filled with the accusation or fear she expected. It was a low, rough whisper of pure, unadulterated awe. How? The single word was a bridge across the chasm of their shock. I don't know, she breathed, the confession both terrifying and liberating. I was angry. I just wanted the light to go out. She felt, more than saw, him move closer. The air displaced by his body was warm, a stark contrast to the unnatural chill her power had left behind. It listened to you, he murmured, his voice now right beside her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. I felt it, a cold thread in the room that was all you. His acceptance was the final key. He wasn't afraid of this strange, dark part of her. He was drawn to it. She could feel the corresponding pull inside him, the hot, fierce life of his alpha spirit reaching for the cool, quiet shadow of her own. The prophecy, the danger, Alpha Damien, all of it faded into the background, stripped away until only this essential, elemental truth remained. Him, the flame. Her, the shadow. Two halves of a primal whole. I can feel you, he whispered, his hand finding her arm in the dark, his touch sending a jolt of liquid heat through her. Like a fire seeking the night. Show me again. His words were a command, a plea, and a seduction all in one. It was no longer a question of choice. This was gravity, inevitable. She turned toward him, her hands finding the hard planes of his chest. His heart was a frantic, wild drum beneath her palm, a rhythm that matched her own. The last of her doubts, her fears, her carefully constructed walls crumbled into dust. She was tired of fighting, tired of being alone. In this one man, this impossible alpha, she had found the only other person in the world who could possibly understand the storm raging inside her. He lowered his head, his lips finding hers in the darkness. This kiss was nothing like the first. It was not a battle of wills, but a deep, searching surrender. It was a silent conversation, a desperate sharing of loneliness and a dawning of hope. It was a promise that in this terrifying new world, they would face it together. He lifted her effortlessly, his mouth never leaving hers as he carried her toward the furs by the hearth, laying her down gently. The fire was out, but a new, more dangerous one was just beginning to build. Every touch was a discovery, every gasp a revelation. This was the point of no return, a willing fall into a fate they could no longer deny. A low, mournful blast from a war horn echoed from the village walls, a sound of pure dread that sliced through the intimate haze. It was followed by a scream, then another. The attack had begun. Chapter 14, The Price of a Choice. The outside world crashed in on them with the violence of a physical blow. The war horn's mournful cry was immediately followed by the chaotic symphony of a pack under siege, the sharp clash of steel, the furious snarls of shifting wolves, and the high, thin screams of the wounded. Eric's was off her in an instant, the tender mate replaced by the lethal alpha. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion, strapping on his silver knife and grabbing a heavy ironwood spear from the wall. The lodge, which moments before had been a sanctuary of burgeoning passion, was now a tactical position, the last line of defense. "Stay here," he commanded, his eyes blazing with a protective fire. "Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone." But the battle was already at their doorstep. A heavy thud shook the main door, followed by the splintering of wood. They weren't just attacking the village walls. They were making a coordinated strike, a surgical assault aimed directly at the heart of the pack, aimed at her. The realization hit Kaia with the force of a physical impact. This was her fault. Every scream she heard, every clash of battle, was a price being paid for her existence. Another crash and the door splintered, a heavy axe blade bursting through the wood. Eric's didn't hesitate. With a roar that was more wolf than man, he shifted. The transformation was not a slow, magical unfurling. It was a violent, explosive reshaping of flesh and bone. He grew, his body twisting and expanding, fur the color of midnight sprouting from his skin. In the space of 3 heartbeats, the man was gone, and in his place stood the monstrous black wolf of her memory, a creature of nightmare and legend. He met the intruders at the door, a force of pure, primal fury. Kaia, however, knew this was a diversion. Damien was too cunning for a simple frontal assault. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for other points of entry. A faint scraping sound from the window in her bedroom confirmed her fears. She snatched a heavy iron poker from the hearth, her heart hammering against her ribs. The window shattered inwards, and a warrior from the Shadow Crest pack tumbled into the room, his silver eyes locking onto her with a triumphant gleam. He was fast, lunging before she could even get her footing. There was no time for a weapon, no time for thought. Pure, terrified instinct took over. She threw her hands forward, a desperate scream tearing from her throat. Shadows erupted. Not a flicker this time, but thick, tangible ropes of darkness that shot up from the floorboards like grasping serpents. They wrapped around the attacker's legs, solidifying for a split second. He yelped in surprise, his lunge turning into a clumsy, sprawling fall. It was an awkward, uncontrolled burst of power, but it had worked. It bought her a single, precious moment. A moment was all Eric's needed. A black blur of motion shot past her. Eric's, in his full wolf form, slammed into the Shadow Crest warrior, his jaws closing around the man's throat. The fight was savage and brutally short. There was a wet, tearing sound and a final, gurgling cry. Then silence. Eric stood over the body, the blood of his rival dripping from his black fur onto the wooden floor. He had just killed another pack wolf, not in a border skirmish, but within the walls of his own lodge. It was a line crossed, a final bloody declaration. The war was no longer a threat looming on the horizon. It was here in their home, and its price was being paid in blood. Chapter 15. The Warrior's Vow. The immediate aftermath of the skirmish was a pocket of eerie silence in the midst of the ongoing battle outside. The air in the lodge was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the smell of splintered, rain-soaked wood. The body of the Shadowcrest warrior lay twisted on the floor, a grim testament to the line that had just been crossed. Kaia stared at it, her stomach churning, the adrenaline from her own near-death experience leaving her weak and trembling. Her clumsy, desperate use of her power had saved her life, but it had also forced Eric's hand, or rather, his jaw. He had killed for her. The thought was a heavy, suffocating weight. Eric's shifted back, the violent transformation reversing itself until the man stood where the wolf had been, his breathing ragged, his skin slick with sweat and rain. He ignored his own nudity, his gaze fixed on her, sweeping over her body in a frantic search for injury. "Are you hurt?" he rasped, his voice raw. She could only shake her head, her eyes still locked on the dead warrior. The sounds of fighting from the village seemed to be receding. The initial assault had been repelled. For now. The cost of that assault was laid bare when the beta returned minutes later, his face grim. "They've retreated, Alpha, but we have casualties. 3 dead, more wounded." 3 dead. The words echoed in the ruined room. 3 wolves from her pack, gone. Because of her. The guilt was a physical thing, a cold blade twisting in her gut. She looked at Eric's, at the blood that wasn't his staining his hands, at the immense, soul-crushing weight that had settled on his shoulders. He was not just her mate. He was an alpha who had just led his people into a war they might not win, all to protect a prophecy he didn't understand, and a girl the pack despised. In that moment, something inside her solidified. The fear, the doubt, the lifelong feeling of being a helpless victim, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard steel. She would not be a liability. She would not be a prize to be fought over. She would be a weapon. She walked over to Eric's as he stood by a basin of water, trying to wash the blood from his skin. She waited until he looked up, his golden eyes filled with a weariness that seemed ancient. "No one else will die for me," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with an absolute conviction she had never felt before. "You have to stop protecting me, Eric's. You have to start training me." He paused, his hands still in the water. "Training you?" "You taught me how to fight with a knife, how to track, how to survive," she explained, her gaze unwavering. "Now, I need you to help me learn to fight with this." She held up her hand, the one that had summoned the shadows. She was no longer asking him to be her shield. She was asking him to be her partner, to help her forge this terrifying, unknown part of herself into something she could control, something they could use. A new understanding passed between them, a shift in their dynamic from protector and protected to 2 warriors standing on the same precipice. As if in response to her vow, a strange feeling pulled at her, a faint sense of awareness, a hum beneath the floorboards in the bedroom. Following the instinct, she went to the room, her eyes drawn to a specific spot near the wall where the wood was slightly discolored. Prying it open with the tip of her knife, she found a small dust-covered space. Inside was a single leather-bound journal, her mother's. She opened it, her breath catching in her throat. The first page was filled with her mother's elegant, looping script, but it was the last sentence that made the blood run cold in her veins. "The shadow is a hungry power. It demands a balance. To command the dark, one must be willing to sacrifice a piece of their own light." Chapter 16. The Poison of Doubt. The funeral rites were a somber, smoke-filled affair. The pack gathered in the main clearing, the ashes of the 3 fallen warriors rising into the gray, unforgiving sky. Kaia stood at the edge of the crowd, a solitary island in a sea of shared grief. She could feel their sorrow, but she could also feel their blame, a palpable wave of resentment that was more chilling than the autumn air. Every tear shed was an accusation. Every mournful howl seemed to carry her name like a curse. She was the cause of this pain, the living catalyst for the blood that had been spilled. The fragile sense of purpose she had found in the lodge was beginning to fracture under the immense weight of their collective mourning. After the ceremony, she watched as Kalen, his face a mask of grim authority, led the other elders toward the Alpha's lodge. She knew what was happening, a council of war, a discussion of their next move. Believing she now had a place in that conversation, a right to be part of the strategy, she followed them. She needed to be part of the solution, not just the problem. But as she approached the heavy oak door of Eric's study, the sound of Kalen's voice, low and venomous, stopped her cold. "And you speak of training it?" the elder was saying, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Alpha, you are entertaining madness. That power is the shadow the prophecy speaks of, the one that will devour the moon. Need I remind you that the Alpha has always been the moon of the pack? Its center, its guiding light." There was a heavy silence. Kaia pressed her ear closer to the door, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drum of dread. "What are you suggesting, Kalen?" Eric's voice was dangerously quiet. "I am suggesting the only solution that protects the pack from a fate worse than this war," the elder retorted. "The legends are clear. There is a ritual, a severing. If the fated bond is rejected by the Alpha before it is completed, the key can never turn in the lock. The power will remain dormant. You must reject her, Erix. For the good of the pack, you must cast her aside." The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Reject her. Cast her aside. It was the embodiment of her deepest, most primal fear. She waited, every fiber of her being screaming for Eric's immediate, furious denial. She expected him to roar, to throw the elder out, to declare his loyalty to her above all else. Instead, there was silence, a deep, echoing void that stretched for 1 second, then 2, then 5. It was a silence filled with calculation, with the weighing of options, the silence of a leader considering the unthinkable. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not filled with rage. It was heavy, exhausted, the voice of a man trapped. "I need to think." That was it. That was the sound of her world shattering. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't a denial either. It was a hesitation. A pause that confirmed every dark, worthless thing she had ever believed about herself. He was considering it. He was actually weighing her life, their bond, against the good of the pack. And in that moment, she knew, with a certainty that was colder and sharper than any blade, what his choice would have to be. An Alpha always chose his pack. Always. The fragile trust she had placed in him, the tender hope that had begun to bloom in the darkness of the lodge, all of it turned to ash and blew away in the wind. Chapter 17. Flight into shadow heartbreak was not a clean break. It was a messy, tearing agony that ripped through every part of her. Eric's hesitation was a betrayal far deeper than any physical wound, a poison that seeped into her soul and affirmed the one truth she had always known. She was not worthy. She was not someone you fought for when the stakes were high. She was the sacrifice you made. To stay and wait for his official verdict, to see the pity and regret in his eyes as he chose his pack over her, was a humiliation she could not endure. She had to run. Not from Damien, not from the war, but from the final crushing blow of his rejection. She moved through the lodge in a silent daze, her limbs feeling heavy and disconnected. The room where he had kissed her, where for a fleeting moment she had felt like she belonged somewhere, was now just a collection of wood and stone, empty of all magic. She packed nothing, save for the worn leather journal she'd found beneath the floorboards. It was the only piece of her past that mattered now, the only thing that felt truly hers. As she slipped out of the back of the lodge, the shadows in the yard seemed to deepen around her, clinging to her like a second skin, muffling the sound of her footsteps on the damp ground. Her power, it seemed, was answering the call of her despair. It made her escape easy. The patrols were on high alert, but they were watching for an invading army, not for a single broken girl slipping away into the night. The forest, her lifelong sanctuary, offered no comfort. Every rustling leaf whispered her failure. Every gnarled branch seemed to point an accusing finger. She ran without direction, driven only by the need to put as much distance as possible between her and the sound of her own heart breaking. She eventually found herself at the Standing Stones, the place where this new chapter of her misery had begun. The ancient monoliths stood stark against the bruised twilight sky, silent and indifferent. It was a fitting place for her hope to die. She sank to the ground at the base of the largest stone, a strangled sob finally breaking free from her chest. "Tears won't save you, little wolf." The voice was calm, smooth, and utterly terrifying. Alpha Damien stepped out from behind one of the stones as if he had been waiting for her all along. He was alone, his silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She scrambled to her feet, instinctively calling on the power that had saved her once before. The shadows around her stirred, but they felt sluggish, weak, diluted by her own overwhelming despair. "Oh, that's a lovely trick," Damien purred, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. He showed no fear. "But it won't work on me." He smiled, a thin, cruel curve of his lips. "I must thank you for making this so easy. I was wondering how I would manage to separate you from your rabid protector." His gaze sharpened, his voice turning insidious. "Tell me, did you really think he would choose you? A broken, unshifted thing with a curse in her blood? He's an alpha. He would have cast you aside sooner or later. I'm simply saving you the heartache." His words were perfectly chosen barbs, twisting the knife Eric's had already plunged into her heart. She let out a cry of rage and flung her hands forward, pushing the shadows toward him. But he simply raised a hand, and a barrier of what looked like shimmering moonlight flared to life, absorbing her power completely. He moved faster than she could track, his hand clamping around her wrist. A strange coldness, far colder than her own, flooded her system, and her connection to the shadows vanished, snuffed out like a candle. She was powerless, defeated. He had been waiting for her, knowing she would break, knowing she would run. It had all been a trap, and her own broken heart had led her right into it. Chapter 18. The Unworthy. Luna. She awoke to the biting chill of cold stone and the faint metallic scent of old blood. Heavy iron chains were bound around her wrists, their weight a constant physical reminder of her utter defeat. She was in a dungeon, a small windowless cell deep in the heart of the Shadowcrest fortress. The despair that had driven her from her pack settled into a permanent hollow ache in her chest. This was it. This was her end. She had run from a broken heart straight into an enemy's chains. There was a grim, fitting symmetry to it that made her want to laugh, but she didn't have the energy. The heavy door creaked open, and Alpha Damien entered, carrying a small lantern that cast long, dancing shadows on the damp walls. He did not look like a gloating conqueror. His expression was serene, almost scholarly, which was somehow even more terrifying. He pulled up a small stool and sat just beyond her reach, observing her as a scholar might study a curious, dangerous specimen. "I am not going to hurt you, Kaia," he began, his voice calm and reasonable. "I am going to save you. And in doing so, I will save us all." She just stared at him, the will to fight or even speak completely gone. "You have been told you are the last of the Umbra," he continued, "and that your power is a great gift. That is a lie, a pretty story told to make a curse more palatable. Your ancestors were not commanders of shadow, they were its slaves, a plague that was nearly unstoppable. They did not wield the darkness, they were consumed by it, and they tried to drag the rest of the world down with them." He leaned forward, his silver eyes intense. "My bloodline has its own history, its own duty. We are the keepers. For generations, my family has been tasked with ensuring the Umbra never rises again. We have our own prophecy, you see." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. It says that the last daughter must be bound, her power contained, to prevent the final darkness. It is a sacred, joyless task, but one we are sworn to. He was weaving a narrative, a story so complete and logical that her exhausted, broken mind could find no reason to doubt it. He was the hero. She was the plague. The prophecy you were told is true, in a way, Damien conceded. There is only one thing that can unleash the full, uncontrollable, world-devouring potential of your power. One catalyst that will turn you from a vessel into a true monster. He watched her, his expression one of pity. It's the completed, fated mate bond. The final blow landed with devastating precision. Eric's thinks he is protecting you, loving you even, Damien said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. But his love, his claim, it is the very thing that will doom us all. He is not your savior, Kaia. He is the selfish fool who is willing to light the fuse on a bomb just to possess it for a little while. By claiming you, he would not be saving the world. He would be ending it. It was perfect. A perfect, soul-destroying trap of logic. In his story, she was the curse, and Eric's love was the trigger. Her very existence was a threat, and the one beautiful, powerful thing she had almost allowed herself to believe in was the ultimate catalyst for destruction. All her life she had felt unworthy, and now she had proof. She was never meant for a loving mate, for the position of Luna, for a place in the pack. She was meant for chains. Bound in the darkness of the dungeon, she finally accepted the truth that had haunted her from the beginning. She was not worthy of love. She was worthy only of this, a cage to hold the monster inside. All was lost. Chapter 19, An Alpha's Choice. The silence in the lodge was a living thing, a suffocating presence that mocked him from every corner. Kaia was gone. The knowledge was not a thought, but a physical blow, a gaping wound torn open in his soul. Her scent still lingered in the air, a faint trace of rain-soaked earth and the unique, wild magic that was all her own. But it was fading. It was the scent of yesterday. His wolf, the powerful, controlled beast that was the core of his alpha authority, was a frantic, howling storm of grief and rage inside him, clawing at the cage of his ribs, screaming her name. He had done this. His hesitation, his damnable, logical weighing of options, had been the blade that had severed her trust and sent her fleeing into the night. He found her tracks easily, faint impressions leading away from the village and into the deep woods. They were the steps of someone running not to a destination, but from a memory. From him. When he returned to the great hall, his face a mask of thunder, Kaelin and the other elders were waiting. "It is for the best, Alpha," the old wolf said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The moon has offered you a path away from the prophecy, a chance to save the pack. Let the girl go." Something inside Eric snapped. The carefully controlled Alpha gave way to the primal, heartbroken male. With a snarl that ripped from the depths of his being, he seized the elder by the front of his robes, lifting him effortlessly from the ground. "Let her go!" he roared, his voice shaking the rafters, his golden eyes blazing with pure, unrestrained fury. "You speak of the pack as if it is a separate thing, as if it is a choice between it and her." He shook the terrified elder. "She is the pack now. She is its heart. There is no pack without her. Do you understand me? There is no me without her." He dropped Kaelin to the floor, the elder sputtering in a heap. Eric's turned to face the stunned council, his choice made, his path clear. "I am not her king," he declared, his voice ringing with an iron finality. "I am her mate. We will not sever this bond. We will defend it. We will bring her home." He would not be the Alpha who sacrificed his heart for the sake of cold logic. He would be the wolf who burned down the world to save the one soul that made his own complete. He turned to his beta, his voice dropping to a low, lethal command. "Gather my warriors, the loyal ones. We march on Shadow Crest." But he knew it wasn't enough. His pack was wounded, weary. A direct assault was suicide. They needed allies. As he strode back to the desolate silence of his lodge, his mind racing, he began to search her room, desperate for any clue, any sign of where she might have gone. Tucked beneath the pillow on her bed, he found it. The small leather-bound journal. She hadn't taken it. In her despair, she must have left it behind, believing its words no longer applied to her. He flipped it open, his eyes catching on the last line she must have read, her mother's elegant script a ghostly whisper from the past. The shadow is a hungry power. It demands a balance. To command the dark, one must be willing to sacrifice a piece of their own light. It wasn't a curse. It was a warning, a set of rules, a puzzle to be solved. And in the depths of his despair, that small distinction gave him something he thought he had lost forever. A sliver of hope that she could be saved not just from Damien but from herself. Chapter 20. A Whisper in the Dark. Despair was a quiet country. There were no grand storms of emotion in the dungeon, only a vast, gray, silent landscape of hopelessness. Kaia lay on the cold stone, the weight of the chains on her wrists a dull, constant ache. Damien's words had been a masterfully crafted poison, twisting every truth until she saw herself as he did, a living plague, and Eric's love as the doomsday trigger. It was a relief, in a way. The lifelong struggle to be worthy was over. The verdict was in. She was a curse, and this cage was not a prison, but a quarantine. It was her proper place. Days blurred. Guards would bring trays of food and water, their faces impassive. She ignored the food, drinking just enough to keep the worst of the dizziness at bay. She was a body waiting for its end. But in the long hours of absolute, suffocating blackness, something began to shift. With nothing left to fear, with no hope left to lose, her mind grew strangely quiet. The frantic, terrified thoughts ceased, leaving an empty stillness in their place. And in that stillness, she began to feel the darkness around her. It was not an absence of light. It was a presence. It was a cool, humming energy that felt ancient and deeply familiar. It was the same power that resided within her, the one she had feared and denied for so long. She thought of her mother's words, not the ones in the journal she'd left behind, but the ones from her childhood memories. Stories of the first wolves, born of the moon's light and the earth's shadow. Not a curse, a balance. Damien had called her ancestors slaves to the dark. But what if he was wrong? What if they were its partners? Slowly, tentatively, she stopped fighting the darkness. She stopped fearing it. She simply lay there and listened. She reached out not with her hands but with her mind, sinking into the quiet, cool embrace of the shadows in her cell. At first, there was nothing. But then, faintly, like the memory of a sound, she began to hear whispers. They were not words, but feelings, impressions, ancient and formless, loneliness, waiting, hunger. The hunger wasn't for destruction. It was a hunger to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have a purpose. It was the same desperate yearning she had felt her entire life. This power was not a monster. It was her. It was the wild, silenced part of her soul, the wolf she had been denied, manifesting in a different form. It was her heritage, her blood, her strength. Lying there in chains, stripped of everything, she finally understood. She was not a vessel for some mindless, destructive force. She was its heir. The realization was not a triumphant roar. It was a quiet, deep, and unshakable settling in her soul. She was not a mistake. She was a legacy. She took a breath, the first one that didn't feel like it was being crushed by the weight of her own despair. She focused on the shadows, on the whispering presence that was her own power reflected back at her. And for the first time, she whispered back into the darkness of her own mind, not with fear, but with a dawning, defiant curiosity. Mother? For Chapter 21, The Forging of a Plan. The journey to the Silver Creek territory was a grim, desperate gamble. Their alpha, a shrewd old wolf named Tiber, valued neutrality and strength above all else. To appear before him as Eryx was now, leading a wounded pack with his fated mate captured, was to reveal a critical weakness. But he had no other choice. He found Tiber watching the morning sun burn the mist off the river that marked their border. "You come with the scent of war and grief on you, Eryx of Black Moon," Tiber said, his voice a low gravel. He did not turn around. Eryx did not posture or pretend. He humbled himself. "I do, Alpha Tiber. My mate has been taken by Alpha Damien. My pack is weakened. I need your aid." Tiber finally turned, his pale gray eyes shrewd and assessing. "Damien's quarrel is with you and your unusual mate. Why should I spill Silver Creek blood for a Black Moon affair?" This was the moment. "Because his quarrel is not with us," Eryx countered, his voice steady, earnest. "It is with a power he does not understand and wishes to control. My mate carries the blood of the Umbra. Damien claims he wants to contain it, but that is a lie. He wants to possess it. He is a fanatic who believes he is entitled to this power. If he succeeds in taking it from her, do you truly believe his ambition will end at my border? Or will he turn his gaze to yours next?" He let the words hang in the air, an appeal not to honor but to pragmatic self-preservation. Tiber was silent for a long time, his gaze distant. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "An unchecked fanatic is a plague to all. My warriors will join you at moonrise, but you will owe me a debt, Eryx. A great one." Deep within the lands of Shadowcrest, a different kind of alliance was being forged. Kaia was no longer waiting for a rescue. She was preparing for a war. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, but a cold, sharp desire for retribution had taken its place. She would not die in this cell. She would not be Damien's chained prophecy. She practiced her newfound connection, learning the language of the shadows. It was a conversation of feeling and intent, a partnership that required calm, clear focus. An opportunity presented itself in the form of a careless guard. He was a young, arrogant wolf who enjoyed taunting her, jingling the keys to her cell just out of reach. During his rounds, he tripped on an uneven stone, and the small iron ring of keys flew from his belt, landing in the dirt a foot from her cell door. With a curse, he kicked dust over them and stalked off, too proud to admit his clumsiness. Later, in the profound, silent blackness of the dungeon, Kaia focused. She didn't try to summon a great, explosive force. Instead, she reached out with a single, delicate tendril of thought. She coaxed a sliver of shadow under the heavy door, a wisp of darkness no thicker than a thread. It touched the keys. With immense concentration, she nudged them. They scraped against the dirt. Another nudge. The process was exhausting, draining her mentally, but she persisted. Bit by bit, the keys slid across the floor until they were finally within reach of her fingertips. She closed her hand around the cold, hard metal. It wasn't an escape plan, not yet. But it was a start. It was the first move in a game she now intended to win. As Eryx stood on a distant hill, watching the warriors of Silver Creek assemble under the rising moon, Kaia sat in her cell, the key to her own cage clutched tight in her hand, both of them ready for the final battle. Chapter 22. The Shadow and the Moon. The assault on the Shadowcrest fortress was a symphony of chaos and fury. Eryx, leading the combined force of Black Moon and Silver Creek warriors, was a tempest of black fur and righteous anger, his every move fueled by a single desperate purpose: find Kaia. He fought his way through the courtyard, a whirlwind of claw and fang, the roars of his allies and the snarls of his enemies, a chaotic drumbeat urging him onward. His destination was the dungeons, the cold, dark place his heart told him she was being held. Every enemy he struck down, every step he took, was a prayer for her safety, an act of penance for the hesitation that had cost him everything. Deep within the fortress, a different kind of battle was being waged. Kaia moved through the stone corridors like a ghost, the keys clutched in her hand. The shadows were her allies now, clinging to her, muffling her footsteps, and whispering warnings of approaching guards. She was not a frightened girl fleeing a cage. She was an avenging spirit rising from her own ashes. Her path was not toward escape, but toward confrontation, toward him. Their two paths, one of fury and one of stealth, converged in the cavernous throne room. Damien was there, lounging on a high-backed, throne-like chair, waiting for them. He was not surprised. He had orchestrated this. "Ah, the lovers reunite," he purred as Eryx burst into the room, shifting back to his human form, his body radiating lethal intent. How beautifully predictable. The fight was immediate. Eryx launched himself at Damien, his movements a blur of controlled rage. But Damien was a master duelist, his style elegant, precise, and cruel. He met Eryx's raw power with cunning and skill, his silver-etched blade a flickering serpent against Eryx's heavier spear. Kaia watched, her heart in her throat, using her shadows to create small diversions, to distract Damien for a split second. But it wasn't enough. With a feint and a brutal slash, Damien's blade bit deep into Eryx's side. Eryx roared in pain, stumbling to one knee, the spear clattering from his grasp. Damien stood over him, triumphant. He looked at Kaia, his silver eyes gleaming. "Here it is, little wolf, the moment of truth." He raised his blade to Eryx's throat. "Save him. Unleash the world-devouring shadow. Become the monster you were always meant to be. Fulfill the prophecy." This was the choice. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. To command the dark, one must be willing to sacrifice a piece of their own light. She looked at Eryx, wounded and bleeding for her, his golden eyes filled not with fear, but with an unwavering, absolute trust in her. In that moment, she finally understood. The light she had to sacrifice wasn't her love, her compassion, or her soul. It was the last frightened piece of her that still believed she was unworthy, the part of her that believed she was a curse. It was a sacrifice of fear itself. "I am not a monster," she whispered, a profound calm settling over her. "I am the Alpha's mate." She closed her eyes and let it go. All the shame, all the pain, all the doubt. She chose love. She chose him. She chose herself. The shadows in the room didn't just erupt. They answered. They poured from her, a controlled, silent storm of tangible darkness. They were not chaotic ropes, but extensions of her will, sharp, precise blades of pure night. They shot forward, wrapping around Damien's sword arm, freezing it in place. Another tendril solidified and shattered his blade. A final, crushing wave of shadow slammed into him, throwing him back against the far wall, where he collapsed, disarmed and broken. The room fell silent. Eryx, clutching his side, looked at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated love. She had won, not with rage, but with acceptance. He staggered to his feet, and with the last of his strength delivered the final binding blow to his rival. But the victory, he knew, belonged to her. Chapter 23. The weight of the crown. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than any war cry. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the gloom of the throne room, illuminating the scene of their hard-won victory. Kaia stood over Damien's vanquished form, the shadows that had answered her call slowly receding, melting back into the corners of the room like a tide going out. The immense power that had flowed through her left a strange, quiet hum in her veins, a feeling of centeredness she had never known. Eryx limped to her side, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her against his wounded body. He leaned on her, not just for physical support, but as if she were his anchor in the swirling aftermath of the fight. When the first of their warriors, a mix of Black Moon and Silver Creek, burst into the room, they skidded to a halt. They saw their alpha, wounded but alive. They saw their enemy, defeated. And they saw her. They stared at Kaia, their expressions a mixture of awe and a deep, primal fear. The shadows were gone, but the echo of her power remained, a palpable presence in the air. She was not the girl they had laughed at. She was not the alpha's shameful secret. She was a force of nature that had just turned the tide of a war. The leaderless Shadow Crest pack, seeing the fate of their alpha, offered no further resistance, their surrender swift and absolute. Walking out into the fortress courtyard was like stepping onto a new world. The combined packs fell silent as they appeared, a living testament to the battle's end. One by one, then, in a great wave, the warriors bowed their heads. It was a sign of respect, of allegiance to the alpha who had led them to victory, and a recognition of the terrifying power of his mate. But as Kaia's gaze swept over her own pack, she saw that not all of them looked at her with reverence. Kaelin and a few of the other elders watched her with wide, fearful eyes. They no longer saw a broken toy or a curse. They saw a weapon of unimaginable magnitude, and the question of who held the leash was now etched onto their faces. The fight for her life was over, but the struggle for her pack's true acceptance had just begun. Later, in the quiet of the Alpha's temporary quarters, the weight of their new reality settled. She gently cleaned the deep gash in Eric's side, her touch careful and steady. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind only the profound, aching relief of their survival. All the doubts, the prophecy, the suspicions that had torn them apart seemed like phantoms from another life. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "I almost lost you," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond the pain of his wound. She leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. The golden flame in their depths burned with a love so fierce and true it stole her breath. "You found me," she replied, "even when I was lost to myself." It was a simple truth, a quiet acknowledgement of the treacherous journey they had taken back to each other, a journey that had forged them into something new, something stronger than fate itself. Chapter 24. What the Moon Witnessed. They returned to their own territory a few nights later, under the watchful gaze of a full silver moon. The pack was healing, the prisoners from Shadow Crest had been freed, and a tentative peace was settling over the forest. The victory had been costly, but it had also been decisive. There was a new respect in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the power that now resided at the heart of their pack. For Kaia, the true homecoming was not setting foot back in the village, but returning to the one place that held the most pain, the ceremonial circle. The clearing was exactly as she remembered from her childhood, a perfect ring of flattened earth surrounded by ancient, silent oaks. This was the stage of her greatest shame, the place where the moon had passed over her and declared her incomplete. Tonight, however, it felt different. It was not a place of failure, but a place of new beginnings. Eric's led her to the center, his hand warm and steady in hers. The moonlight bathed them in a soft, ethereal glow. "This is where I first failed," she said, her voice a soft whisper in the quiet night. "No," he corrected gently, turning to face her. "This is where your journey began." He took both of her hands in his. "My hesitation in the study. It was my greatest failure. I let the logic of an alpha overwhelm the truth of my heart. I will never doubt you again, Kaia. You are the strongest person I have ever known." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I thought I was a curse," she confessed, "and I thought your love was the trigger. I didn't understand that your belief in me, even when I had none in myself, was the only thing that could save me." He lifted her hand to his lips, his gaze intense and full of a love that filled all the broken places inside her. "Then let us make it official," he murmured. "Let us give the moon something new to witness." This was the final step, the marking, the completion of their fated bond. He lowered his head, his breath warm against her neck. It was not an act of possession, not a claim of ownership, but a final, sacred vow, a promise of mutual acceptance, of two souls becoming one. When his teeth gently grazed her skin, A jolt of pure, golden energy shot through her, a warmth that met the cool, quiet hum of her own power. It was not a collision, but a perfect, harmonious balancing. The bite was a release, a final clicking into place of their two halves. As the magic of the bond settled, a profound sense of peace washed over her. The shadow power inside her no longer felt like a separate, hungry entity. It felt like her. A part of her, perfectly entwined with the fierce, protective light of his spirit. The core emotional question that had haunted her entire life, will I ever believe I am worthy of love, power, and belonging, was finally, irrevocably answered. She looked up at Eric's, at her mate, her alpha, her partner, and saw her own worth reflected in his eyes. Yes, she was worthy. She had not been given worthiness by a fickle moon or a fated bond. She had fought for it. She had bled for it. And now, she had claimed it for herself. The moon, which had once witnessed her shame, now looked down upon her triumph. And tonight, it would witness the beginning of her reign.